go ahead and get started since the room's filling up. Ravi, I see the first screen. That's great. Okay, so hello everyone. Hello Database. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maddie Watt. I'm the Senior Manager of People and Programs at the Hive. I'm going to really quickly go over the ground rules for today, and then I'll explain what the Hive Think Tank does, and then I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to TM Ravi, the Hive's founder and Managing Director. So chat rules, please be respectful in the chat and refrain from product plugs. This is not the place for recruiting for your startup, and thank you for cooperating. We love questions. We definitely want you to ask questions. So to ask a question, please use the Q&A function. It's a button at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote for a question if you see it on there that somebody else has already asked. So please don't put questions in the chat. It's just a lot easier for our speakers if it's organized in one place. So we really appreciate you using the Q&A button. And this session is being recorded. It will be available to view later on the Hive's YouTube channel. I will go ahead and send that link out on the chat. So please go ahead and watch our video later too. And to follow along or contribute on Twitter or social media, please use the hashtag HiveData. We love seeing your posts, your submissions, your pictures of us talking on Zoom. So please go ahead and follow along and use the hashtag HiveData. And to register for Hive Data events, please go to our meetup page, and I will drop that in the chat as well. So really quickly, I'm just going to explain what the Hive Think Tank does. It's an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporations, and thought leaders. We are bringing you events basically every week right now, virtual events, and we're also bringing you content on our Medium page. So today we just posted a story about the joining of the CEO for Glide Health, which is one of the Hive's co-creations. So it's really exciting. You can always find out about what we're doing in terms of AI, blockchain, enterprise through going onto our Medium page or by attending our events like you are right now. So I will go ahead and drop all those links in the chat later. Next slide, please. Thank you. And thank you to our Think Tank sponsors, including the infamous and wonderful TIBCO. We have a lot of great sponsors. We love working with them. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor or working with us on an event, a virtual event, please contact me, Maddie@hivedata.com.
And we especially are thankful to the rock star that TIBCO has, Erin from Nelson's team.
Yes, Erin. Woo, Erin's in the house. She's here. Thank you, Erin, for all you do. Great. And then I'm just going to really quickly tell you guys about the 2 events we've got coming up on the calendar. We're always adding more, so you always have to check back on our meetup page. So next Wednesday, we are hosting an event on physical retail and how COVID is making that transform. So please join us next Wednesday at 11 a.m. I will drop the link for that. We'll be joined by the founder and CEO of Beta, which if you're in the Bay Area, you might have been to one of their stores, as well as the CDO of Westfield Malls. So that's going to be really interesting. And it will be moderated by our friend Joe from Interlace Ventures.
Who's been to a mall since March 1st?
Who's ever going back to a mall? I don't know, but we'll find out next week. And then we have our contact tracing and privacy event that we had originally scheduled for the beginning of June. We had to cancel that due to a speaker need that came up at the last minute. So now we've rescheduled it. It's back on the calendar for the end of July 30th. Please go ahead and sign up for that too. That's going to be really interesting. Everyone's talking about contact tracing right now and for good reason. So please join us with that. And I will again drop that link. And without further ado, Ravi.
Thank you, Matty, and thank you for helping put this together. And thank you, Erin from TIBCO. So just a brief introduction to the Hive. The Hive is a venture capital entity, and in particular, it's a certain kind of venture capital which is known in the marketplace as a venture studio. And so the main differentiation is that in addition to us investing capital in seed, Series A, Series B, and so forth, we have a strong operating team. So joining us on this call is our CTO, Mohan Reddy. We have a chief product officer, marketing people, and so on. Our focus is around the application of data and AI in the enterprise and different kind of vertical industries. And And so you'll see that we are very thematic in our focus. And here is a sense of some of the companies. Matty earlier mentioned Glide Health. Glide Health just brought on board a founder and CEO today. It's in the healthcare in the provider revenue management space, but you'll see other companies that we've done in the industrial space around application, around privacy and security, around applications and workflow, and so on and so forth. And some of our companies have been successful. We were fortunate to participate in the IPO of Pinterest last year, and you see some of the other companies. So if you are an entrepreneur or a founder, or you'd like to work in one of our companies, please reach out to us. As we speak, we are developing and collaborating with entrepreneurs on 4 or 5 new companies, one around MRP and supply chain, another one around healthy spaces, healthy buildings, health, safety, and environment in workplaces, a third one around field services, enabling kind of remote field services, and automation, not of the field service, but a lot of the crap that field technicians have to do before and after the service, and so on and so forth. So please reach out to us. If you are going to be on Twitter today, please use the hashtag HiveData. And with that, I'd like to introduce Greg James, the Chief of Staff, Senior Director for the CTO's office at TIBCO, who will moderate the event today.
Hello, everybody, and thanks, TM Ravi, appreciate it. So again, a couple housekeeping items, reminder to go ahead and enter questions via Q&A. I will try and weave questions into the discussion we're having if I feel they fit into the topic we're currently on. Otherwise, we will answer questions. We'll leave time at the end to answer your questions. And then if for some reason we run out of time to answer all questions, I'm sure your questions, right, Maddie and TM will be answered after the session, right? So everybody's questions will be answered, right? With that, the other thing is that for the audience as well as for the panelists, this is called a panel. TM and Ravi and Nelson have been on these with me before. I don't do panels. I do discussions, right? So I like them to be more free-flowing, more of a chat. And the way I describe it is, you know, there's 4 of us sitting down at a table having our favorite cocktail, talking about some interesting technology topics, and it's just a conversation amongst friends. And so it'll kind of flow like that. And so just for the panelists, you know, that's kind of the way we'll let it go. You just talk, and then I'll just move us through topics, and we'll kind of move through, you know, at the pace and at the flow that makes sense. You know, so at the kickoff, you know, we're talking about APIs, right? So, oh my gosh, you know, topic that's been around for a very long time. And oh, by the way, gosh, oh my God, man, somebody ought to shoot me in the head. I almost didn't introduce who was on the panel with me today. So I just realized I'm looking at the people's face and go, wait, I forgot something. What did I forget? Who's here? It's not just me. So with me, Salil Kulkarni, he's interim EVP and CIO Caesar. So thank you, Salil, for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And then TM Ravi, folks know him from the earlier introduction, founder and managing director of the Hive. And then Nelson Petracek, who is CTO of TIBCO Software, also the author, recently published book of API Success. And he also happens to be my boss. So really give some awesome feedback about this amazing moderator that's on this session today, because you know, when we come out of COVID, I want to have a place to work still. Anyway, so thanks everybody again. Thank you guys for joining. I appreciate taking your time. I know everybody's schedules are busy. I think we all live a life of Zoom after Zoom after Zoom after Zoom meeting now about almost 24 hours a day. So thanks for jumping on another Zoom with me. But anyway, APIs, wow, you know, around a long time, you know, called different things at times, but have been around a long time. The underlying technology of how you APIs from SOAP to now REST to other new things that I'm sure we'll talk about, have been around. But, if we didn't think they were still important today, if you want a reminder, just remember to look at your phone every once in a while. There's a good reminder of how important APIs are, because without them, all those cool apps on your phone would essentially cease to function the way you see them working today. And so one of the first questions I have, even though we have that, right? One of the first topic points is about the relevancy of APIs. And so again, within the world of a smartphone, sure, we get it, but boy, there's some really exciting areas that APIs are starting to really pop up into. And I'm not going to say them because I'm going to let us talk about them as a group. And so, what are some of the ones that you guys are all seeing? We'll let Nelson go first. Yeah.
Sure. Let me add a couple to start anyway, because I know the first question we had was, well, with the Hive being very innovative, working with a lot of new innovative startups, fantastic reputation, obviously successful, a lot of organizations in which they participate in and help drive. So where does APIs fit into that conversation? I mean, you saw the areas that the Hive works in, whether it's 5G, blockchain, whether it's around AI, ML, some of the other areas that are vertical specific, and so on. And I think in every one of those situations, you're going to find APIs that are powering these different capabilities. And so whether you're dealing with the areas around IoT, whether you're talking about how do you interact with a blockchain technology, whether that's from an enterprise perspective or permissionless, whether you're talking about the use of AI, ML, and how do you wrap those models into invocable pieces of functionality that then can be consumed by other applications, they all involve APIs to some degree. And so, regardless of how they're defined over the years, which I think that, the definition has changed, and we'll get into that. So I won't cover that too much here in the opening line, but the APIs are all around us, and they're part of the new emerging technology stacks that we're starting to see, and they're being utilized across the board regardless of the vertical. So they're still very, very relevant, and even more so, I think, in today's world and going forward.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, if I may, in the business world, those of us who consume those APIs that companies like TIBCO are providing for us, or providing the underlying capability for, companies are less and less purpose specific, right? So it's certainly true for a company like Caesars Entertainment, where I work. We are essentially 7 businesses under one roof, an integrated resort. And each one of those businesses needs capabilities that are unique to that business. But when a customer comes and visits us, they see us as one company. They're traversing through each one of those businesses. And you have to have the knitting, if you will, to stitch all that together and create a single customer journey. Without APIs, it would be incredibly difficult, maybe not possible, and certainly inefficient.
So I'll give kind of one, so the response to our API is still relevant. Heck yes. And so I'll give you one kind of technology reason and 2 kind of business reasons. So the technology reason is microservices. As you see extreme modularization, APIs are sort of the currency for value exchange.
Right.
And so as long as microservices are relevant, APIs are relevant. That's the kind of technology reason. On the business side, 2 things. One is the overall kind of services ecosystem. So, in the past you had monolithic kind of software. Now in a kind of a cloud SaaS world, you have kind of best of breed services combined together. And that's enabled by API. The second is around sort of digital transformation. So whether it is customer experiences, enabling new channel, digitizing different parts of your business and business processes, the degree to which an enterprise embraces the APIs is kind of measures, how digitally transformed they are. And this pandemic has taught us a lesson. Those who are further down that journey of digital transformation have tended to be more resilient, are recovering faster, and in our opinion, will have longer term kind of resilient growth.
Yeah, I think it's really a great
Yeah.
point. You know, COVID really has drawn out some of that. So Nelson, I think you were about to add on to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've definitely got the aspect of how people can expose a lot of their functionality and how quickly then that enables them to pivot. So, and you know, you're probably going to say the same thing. We've done this once or twice, but yeah, very much using APIs as an enabler to quickly switch. And even without the current global situation, consumer tastes adjust. New technologies are brought forward that you need to leverage and take advantage of for a variety of business purposes. And so being able to quickly do that and assemble new applications, new capabilities, or expose new elements of data or whatever it is, APIs are really a key enabler of that. So yeah, definitely a big part of it. We do see that across a large number of our customers.
Yeah, it is huge. I mean, and in the world of the pandemic that we're all in the midst of, modularization is really, really important, the core of what an API is, right? But, you know, why is it important? There's a number of different reasons. But one thing that can't be overlooked is security. The ability to secure these APIs at the modular level allows for an enterprise to be secure. And that can't be underscored. It's so vitally important in today's world. You know, at one point in time, we were tracking through our cybersecurity department. There was about $1 million a day that was tallied in fraud related to COVID, right? So without the ability to have that cybersecurity at the modular level, at that API level, it's going to be a huge problem.
Wow. So Greg, that opening series, you probably got 85 topics to cover now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I wanted to toss something out. This isn't a commercial, but TIBCO today, with COVID going around, we had a project that we started, you know, talk about APIs and how important and relevant they are. We had a project we started just a few, 6-7 weeks ago, to stand up a COVID-19 symptom tracker for companies to use. And we were able to do it in a very short period of time. And the reason is, one, our TIBCO products are cloud, but the ability to use APIs all over the place and quickly stitch things together, which is what we did. And so, yeah, I mean, there's every day new use cases, all right? And especially COVID has really drawn out some other ones. And I think we all could think about how information is shared better today with COVID across various agencies and governments and companies, right? That would all be APIs, right? So I think we'll see even more of that to come. So yeah, great conversation. So I think we have easy question to answer, right? Still relevant? Yeah, heck yes, right? And will be for some time. But, you know, with any technology, even technology like APIs have been around for a while and have morphed, you know, there's always challenges we face. And, you know, and a lot of times, you know, as your developers, they really see some of these challenges. In fact, one of the questions that came up actually fits into kind of where I was going next. Interesting that there are challenges, and I would like to hear and like you guys to share some of the challenges you know or think about, or they're still trying to be solved on the developer implementation side. But somebody who isn't a developer asked the question, you know, given that there's all this proliferation of APIs and thousands more to come, you know, is there a centralized directory of which somebody could find APIs from all these different companies and all these different capabilities from all these organizations, even from the government or whomever, right? Yeah, pretty. I think I know the answer to that question, but I'm not going to answer it. I'll let you guys talk about that.
I went first last time, so let's see. Salil's on my left or right, depending on which way you're looking at it. Let's have him tackle that one first.
Yeah,
especially since he had to do this at Caesars.
Yeah. So there's a couple different things that I would, the way that I would answer this. One, you know, most organizations, certainly large complex organizations similar to Caesars, have a diverse set of technology that's deployed in the environment. And that is comprised of systems that have been around many years, sometimes decades. And we certainly are true. You know, it's true of Caesars. as well as very modern systems that are cloud-based, that have APIs pushing at the cloud layer across all the various channels, utilizing tools that allow you to publish these APIs to some of our customers, as well as everything in the middle, right? And you have to be able to traverse kind of the modern with the legacy. And getting capabilities, functionality, security out of legacy systems sometimes is a challenge, and that remains to be a challenge. When you're integrating two modern systems, it's pretty efficient. It's usually, you know, I don't want to say a click of a button, but it's from a development standpoint far easier to do that. So, you know, harnessing the power of an API, sometimes getting at legacy systems and the information out of legacy systems still remains today. It's easier, but it's still, you may not have that the same efficiency out of it. The other part of it is this: business has changed, and you know, what do we use APIs for? It's to serve a purpose. It's not technology for technology's sake. It's to get at a capability to provide some functionality so that our end user, whether it's a customer or an internal user, has some capability. That capability may not have been envisioned when that original legacy system was put into place, but yet you have to integrate with that legacy system and sometimes piecemeal together different pieces of information to provide that functionality. And that's still challenging today.
Yeah, no, there's the whole issue of cataloging and discovering APIs. I mean, so as you mentioned, organizations are really expanding their use of APIs, and these APIs tend to be both internal and external facing. Mm-hmm. So you expose some functionality, some data, whatever it is, to other organizations, partners, and so on. But you're also going to expose and leverage APIs internally in order to speed up the development of different integration points or other systems, or again, other application services and so on, and that'll be internal facing. So then, and I think there's a question here on the Q&A about this exploding endpoint problem, where you've got all these APIs. How do you know what you've got? How do you know that, well, this has already been implemented, I should use that API as opposed to having to write it from scratch? And I know that there's a couple different things that people have done. Obviously, there's kind of the equivalent of an API marketplace or an API community. I know, for example, I'm from Canada, the Canadian government, you can go to a certain site and you can see all the APIs that they have published, to see what data sets you can pull down and things like that. So there are starting to be these communities and these marketplaces built out, kind of like an app store, I think was the one comment, an app store around APIs so that you can discover them, get the documentation and so on. But I always start, whether it's internal or external, it all starts with an API program. And it all starts in terms of how you're going to manage, govern, publish, document, keep track of these APIs, and even how you're going to market these APIs, both internal and external. And without that program, you will just end up with a whole variety of API endpoints that may fit, may not, may get duplicated, all those kinds of things. And you got to put some structure around it. There's got to be some structure, some governance, just to make sure that your program is exposing these APIs in a centralized fashion in a way that makes it easy for people to discover. And so there's different indexing techniques and so on that you can use. But that's what I see organizations do today.
Yeah, and that was actually a great lead in into one of the topics I had here. Obviously, I've read your book a few times, and so and one of the things you talk about in there is the importance of the program, right? And the program defined out of many facets of being a successful program. And so one of the things I did want to talk about, and you alluded to it a little bit, Nelson, and love to hear TM, Ravi, and Salil's thoughts on this as well, is, putting up a program, keeping that efficient, how do you do that? I mean, that's an easy thing to say as a sentence, but what's behind the scenes is something far, more complicated and requires very much a multifaceted team. It requires multi parts of the organization to be engaged, right? Especially if you're letting APIs become their external. So now you have some business value you're starting to align to most likely, and maybe even some monetization, so some very significant factors here, right, that come into play.
Yeah, no, that's true. And and Robbie made this point earlier, there's the technical aspect of it. So REST, GraphQL, schemas, you get into versioning. When do you deprecate your APIs? There's the whole technical side of it, but there is definitely the business aspect of it. And even something like the business case around the API program. How do you measure? How do you monitor? How do you sustain the business case? What metrics are you going to use to go against the organization's metrics? What is that all going to look like? How are you going to map that across? What roles do you need within your program? So that there is a whole organizational aspect to this, even culture, and even the again the business side of it. So that
Yeah, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the guys too. And my thought, I will state this, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe the business goal side, right, is the number one. If you don't have a business goal that you're aligning the API to, then why are you even doing it, right?
Right. Yeah, and I'll jump in. I think it starts with, at least at every organization that I've been at, we've started with a strategy, a business strategy, and in today's world, it's a technology-infused business strategy. So to your point, Greg, if we're not serving a purpose and we're not serving it in an effective, efficient manner, if it's not reaching a strategic goal, then we shouldn't be spending any time on it, right? And that strategy is the cornerstone of that technology strategy. It starts with clear governance. There has to be an organizational structure that supports that business strategy. It has to, within that technology strategy, the component of the technology strategy, it has to reach some goals, clear standards, clear structure, for lack of a better term, a center of excellence around that core enterprise architecture, right? Which then eventually will cascade down into a team or a set of teams that is developing those APIs and communicating those out to the public, whatever that may be, whether that's internal or external. And it has to be very much a living and breathing thing. You don't do it once and put it on a shelf and then hope that somebody finds it. And, then the word of I try not to use the word deprecation. It's really, I think it's just a constant, you're revisiting it on a constant level. So you're adding, changing, enhancing, or removing capabilities as it makes sense for that business purpose, right? And it's a constant, it's like your body, it changes, right? And APIs are no different.
Yeah, one of the analogies I've used before is, APIs, it's a program, right? And it is a program. And the analogy I've used is, it's like when you drive the really cool, high-tech, brand new car off the lot, pretty awesome, but if you don't have essentially a program of how you're going to manage, maintain, keep that thing fueled, it's just a matter of time before it's sitting alongside the road and waiting for somebody to come tow you away. And that's really the truth. The APIs require a lot of care and feeding and a constant life cycle of maintenance. And so I think that leads us into another area of discussion, to start to I'm going to do this two ways. I'm going to ask the audience, please answer some things you see. I'd like to hear your feedback on what you see as key success factors in an API program. And while we're getting some of your feedback, and the panelists will be able to see that, I'm going to ask the panelists, you guys, the same question. What are some of those key things? We talk about the program and life cycle and keeping the car running on the road really fast. What are some of those things we should be thinking about? And we touched on a little bit of them already, but I think there's some more depth there that would be good to share with people.
So I'll jump in and I can reiterate some of the things that were mentioned. So today APIs are really done for kind of convenience and fluidity, and generally driven by engineers. And organizations really kind of will benefit a lot more by thinking in terms of units of value and defining kind of modularity or microservice in units of value and the exchange of value. And so that'll bring in sort of non-engineers like product managers and those kind of business folks into the equation, whether it's internal or external, some kind of external service of some kind.
Yeah, it makes sense, you know. And Nelson, I know there's a lot of connections here and many of the things that we do, and I'm sure Salil, you know, you as an organization, right, probably have some direct comments on that as well. So I'd love to hear feedback from both of you on those comments.
Sure. So, I mean, you know, at Caesars, we have been, and prior to my arrival at Caesars 4 years ago, a large consumer and a large believer in kind of the API strategy. We've been utilizing and morphing as technology has changed, and APIs, the use of APIs have changed over the course of the last couple of decades, really. One of the things that I think is really important is to measure the success of those APIs. So not just the number of APIs you're writing and kind of the, you know, the speed and the resiliency and the stability. I think that's kind of tools at the table, but how is it in, you know, as you're doing a process map, right? How deeply is it embedded in generating revenue or saving cost? To what degree is it contributing to that? You know, there's a lot of new technologies that are out there that purport to do X, save X, or generate Y, or increase efficiency. But ultimately, most of them are missing one or two or three or four elements, right? One, resiliency, you know, two, scalability, certainly security, stability, and maintainability. So if you think about robotic process automation, and it has a place everywhere, but it's not the most resilient technology that's out there. You can take a what they call a non-developer or a non-technologist and put them on RPA, and they can get something done. But at the end of the day, you know, APIs, they live, they last, they can morph, and they have all those characteristics that are important. Not just to technologists, but to business folks as well. And it's really important as a leader in an IT organization to start measuring that and then communicating that out there so people understand what the value of these APIs are and why you constantly have to put some care and feeding into it.
Yeah, and I think the key part there, and I think both gentlemen here have mentioned it, is really around monitor and instrument early and include it as part of the API design process. So, and it's one of the QA questions. There's lots of tools to say it's up, it's down, it's using this much CPU. That's all fine. You need that, but you still need to be able to translate it back to, well, so what is the value of that API? And if it's external facing, there's one set of value criteria that you can use, and it's things like, you know, what is the average revenue per user, or the lifetime value of the customer that's associated with that API and API program. And so there's a number of those kinds of metrics you can use where there's revenue tied to it. Some of it gets a little tricky because sometimes your APIs are more of an add-on onto another capability or another platform. So you got to figure out how you want to measure and manage that. And then internally, you're looking at more, maybe it's more for operational efficiency. So how much faster are you able now to deploy new solutions compared to what you had before because you have these APIs? But the key is these system sort of performance monitoring tools don't tell you that. So you need to think about how you're going to actually build that into the program and to the APIs themselves right from the very beginning when these things are built, not after, because you'll never go back and do it after, at least not in probably the most efficient manner, even if you do go back.
And to the kind of questions here and what you just say, the generally sort of weak part of APIs right now is around the data governance aspect. And Salil mentioned kind of data security, but also as one of the questions here alludes to, you know, the data reliability, kind of the quality and accuracy part of it. And then the third area, which is as we are stringing together these APIs, what about the data privacy aspect? And so these are areas that I think just need to develop some more.
Yeah, and those are getting more and more challenging, right? With GDPR and CCPA and the myriad of other, things that are coming down the pipe in New York and other states, as well as the rest of the world. GDPR obviously is outside the U.S. and has come into the U.S., but those are they would be incredibly challenging if you didn't, number one, have a data governance program, and two, if you didn't have an efficient modular way to deal with data. And harnessing the power of APIs allows you to do that. It doesn't solve the problem by itself, but it's certainly an underlying mechanism that can make it possible and efficient.
Yeah, and some of the folks, if you hear the gentleman was commenting on the Q&A about they were building essentially APIs for external consumption, and called out a bunch of areas that are things that you guys have all touched on already, and as success factors: identity, authentication, authorization, multi-factor authorization, tokenization, expiration, metrics, right? KPIs for APIs, behavior changes of APIs due to underlying logic changes. I might be, my gosh, right? Pretty good list of success factors there, and again, easy things to write, sometimes fairly difficult things to implement without really some strong organizational work in a program around APIs. So yeah, I think this is great, the conversation here. And I'm going to jump to, we're going to go to our last topic here, but I'm going to jump to some of these questions and try and cover some of them off. I got one a cool little comment here: an AI for API discoverability, right? Just as a question, which is kind of cool. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Yep. And somebody else asked, about the API economy and the ecosystem. What are some of the next gen options, both from an API producer or a consumer provider? Some thoughts on that?
So just on this discoverability part, so one of the challenges we have with APIs is that the definition of APIs sort of varies from vendor to vendor, and so there is a need for a kind of a meta framework, if you may, that kind of like how SQL queries emerged, that sort of allows APIs to be easily, without manual kind of intervention, to be easily sort of understood, because that will support kind of automated discovery of it. It'll remove the kind of, you're seeing API balkanization, which is there's a switching cost. If you're moving from Amazon to Google, there's a switching cost, and that's because everyone's APIs definitions are different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're starting to see almost like an evolution. So, everybody, Rob, you mentioned microservices at the beginning. Everyone said, oh, microservices, that must mean REST over HTTP. It's like, well, no, you don't equate the two like that, right? And I know there was a question earlier around distributed software development and considerations to improve the reliability of those types of systems. And one of the ways in which you do that is to make sure that your services, your capabilities, the way in which you're defining your domains are properly bounded, and that you identify any dependencies and actually whether or not you even need those dependencies, and just make sure that that domain is dealing with that domain. And so use things like domain-driven design and some of those aspects, but just design and way in which you define and look at the ways that your domain is going to interact with other domains and the APIs that it's going to use and how it's going to share data and how it's going to store data and so on. All that becomes very, very relevant. But APIs are one of those things where they don't just mean REST over HTTP, and they don't even just mean request reply anymore, right? So people are starting, I think, to come back to the ideas that, and these are not new ideas. These ideas have been around for a while, but can I have an event-driven API? So I just want to subscribe to an interest in whatever that API is delivering. And whenever something happens that's of interest to me, it gets pushed to me automatically. So I don't have to ask it a question. So there's new emerging technologies and actually specifications like the async API specification and so on that are looking to bring some form of quote unquote standardization to how you would develop and build these other types of APIs, at least the API contract. Now, the implementation could be anything and everything. And quite frankly, that's in some cases half the point. You can pick and choose what you want. Whoever's using the API doesn't care. Right? They just know they're dealing with a contract. But you're seeing this evolution where it's not just, throw something in a container and put a REST interface on top of it and communicate via HTTP and you're done. It's not that anymore. It's different types of APIs interacting with different technologies, which are part of, maybe it's not even a standard containerized management platform anymore. It's service meshes and some of these other technologies that are emerging to really help deal with the problem around having thousands of APIs deployed and how do I manage that, scale that, identify issues, recover from faults and things like that. So
yeah, and you're leading right into the last topic we have, which is the future of API development solutions. And one of the comments on the chat, which is awesome, Nelson, this one's going to trigger you, and I'm sure it's going to trigger Salil as well, because the question was, do you see a role for API monitoring in the legal industry? Who moved the data to the cloud? When could it be considered part of chain of custody, right? So this is going to jump right into another one of our favorite topics, which is blockchain. And I don't think we have enough time. Blockchain in of itself is a very long topic. But yes, definitely some interesting things when you look at the future of APIs and how they start to connect to things like blockchain and AI and ML and IoT. So love to hear your thoughts as we kind of wrap up and open up for any other questions we might have. So,
yeah,
I didn't want Nelson to start.
Yeah. There's a lot there. There's a lot what you just asked, and I do agree blockchain could be several of these sessions. But I wanted to touch on something that Nelson had just brought up because it's so incredibly relevant in the business that I'm in today. Caesars and all of our competitors, we're in the experience kind of industry segment, right? And the experiences are pretty diverse and vast, and they're relevant in the moment. And having the ability to recognize that real time and then tie it across all the other information that we have across all the different business verticals and then come back and do something about it is that separates the leader from the followers, right? And can make all the difference in the world of a customer's visit. Imagine a customer who's playing a slot machine and is way up or way down, and then something happens, in the moment. They're way down, they win the jackpot. What do you want to do? Well, maybe you want to, give them the ability to book a suite at the villa immediately, right then and there. Something that they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do, but now they want to spend the rest of the week in a $25,000 a night villa. If you don't have that information and you don't have the ability to tie it to the other systems, in our enterprise via a safe, secure, and efficient, quick, speedy manner, you're going to lose that opportunity, right? And, potentially the customer is going to leave happy, but maybe not as happy as they would have otherwise been. So those are all extremely relevant cases. And the point around the legal industry, we deal with that on a regular basis. I mentioned GDPR, I mentioned CCPA, and all of those things. And when you layer that on top of the ever-changing industry, and now with the pandemic that's going on, did your dealer have a mask on? Was the customer, blah, blah, blah. All these things are potentially extremely important, and you have to be able to capture that information in a secure, reliable manner. Doing it ad hoc without APIs is probably going to lead to, at a minimum, an inefficient way and probably at erroneous results.
And even to add on to that, so did they, those things you asked about the legality and were they wearing a mask and so forth. There's also the auditability and provability that did occur, right? Because we all know. In fact, we had a conversation recently with a company, and they were talking about COVID-19 and potential solutions to bring their employees back. And the statement they made was, when we get sued, we want to be able to do this, right? Not if, it was when we get sued. And, you know, the world of COVID is really changing, but it does call upon a bunch of things on the legality, the auditability, logability, you know, issues that they need to be solved. And they're there. We have the capabilities, right? But now it kind of opens up this whole new thought process about, okay, what should we be doing as we do these implement these solutions? So yeah, great feedback. So Ravi, Nelson, other areas, you know, cool future things you guys are seeing? You're on mute, Ravi, just so you know. Yeah.
Good friend, Bill Tolson, he and I work together. He's one of the leading minds in legal discovery, asked a question here around IoT. And so today APIs are built for sort of human consumption. And so as IoT develops, what needs to be done with APIs so that they can be consumed by machines? And a lot of the things we talked about, discovery, a meta language, they all kind of go towards that. A second area is around kind of 5G. You know, 5G, with 5G, then when it comes to the application, the network is not just a postman now. The network is playing a kind of an integral kind of part. And one of the challenges with APIs, or deficiencies, if you may, is for applications that are latency sensitive. There isn't a kind of a mechanism built. I mean, there are some efforts going on, but there isn't a sort of standard effort built into APIs. And so kind of how do 5G APIs and kind of response time assurance sort of come together? I think is another interesting area.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously all fantastic examples. Just to add one more, from an AI ML standpoint, you've got the immediate attention, I think, now that organizations are facing, or the issue that organizations are facing is really around the whole model ops space. And everybody has models. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do you operationalize those models, call them, deploy them, scale them, find them, all those kinds of things. And I think, you know, APIs obviously have a key role there. And again, it doesn't have to be request reply. You can make it real time and event driven. So there's that part. I think AI ML, in terms of even doing things like monitoring usage. So the comment was made earlier around using AI for API discovery, but there's also using AI ML for actually looking at the streams of data that are going through your APIs. And so looking, you know, fraud is a good example. You know, does this API, this is what is deemed to be quote unquote normal behavior for that API. I am now outside of that band of normal behavior. What does that mean? Right? And you can do that just by using these techniques against the APIs and monitoring the flow of data through the APIs themselves. Now, going back to security, privacy, all that, you've got that issue, but that is another way. And then even being able to have AI ML also optimize these APIs. And now this gets into the machine-to-machine discoverability. How do you know who can see what? How do these machines exchange information and do so without human engagement? And so you see this kind of blending of 5G, IoT, edge computing, and discoverability, you know, all getting pushed out away from the data center and people into now devices figuring out not only how to use each other's capability, but you got the discovery aspect of it, then how do you use it and exchange data, and then how do you monetize that? Some device wants to pay another device for some capability. How do you do that? So you know, there's that aspect of it as well that I think is going to be interesting again in that particular context.
Isn't that called Skynet, by the way?
Yeah, I think somebody called it like that somewhere along the lines. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, might be dating myself a little bit on that one, but yeah. Gosh. So any other thoughts? Otherwise, we'll open up for questions. Any other comments?
Just one more thought on this 5G and applications thing, which is, so, you know, 5G is going to have amazing speeds and feeds and, you know, video and augmented reality, all of that's going to happen. But in the enterprise context, the two kind of things that are most exciting about 5G are this kind of slicing for kind of QoS assurance and network slicing. And the second is around edge, and where the network itself is a participant. And I think just the whole world of APIs will further sort of expand with 5G.
Salil, do you have any thoughts as well? You're on mute, by the way, just so you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, no, I think both Ravi and Nelson's comments are really relevant. It's a really exciting time to be a consumer, if you will, of APIs. And, you know, with the advent of 5G, utilizing AI, ML in IoT, a place like an enterprise like Caesars that has, you know, various systems that do various things that have the need to communicate in a real-time basis across all of these mediums in a speedy manner. I think we've just hit the tip of the iceberg of around what it exposes and the new capabilities. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see companies that are, you know, further developing these capabilities, whether it's on the network, whether it's in 5G, or whether it's core API development, the technology that leverages it. Because companies like us will be able to leverage that and bring a whole new experience to our customers. So I'm very excited. I'm thrilled about what the future holds.
Yeah, you know, to add to that, we did Nelson and I did a fireside chat, and I forget the gentleman's name, so I apologize, but he is the CIO of Rockwell Automation, and he was talking about, you know, IoT, and he and I were chatting about some of the really amazing things happening, as you called out, Salil, IoT and AI and ML and all these new technologies. And I said, it's just an amazing time. I've been in technology for 30 years, and I've never been so excited as what I'm seeing today. Right? There's so much happening, and it's world-changing type of technology. And his comment was, yes, sir, we are at a point of inflection. And I'm like, wow, that summed it up right there, because we truly are.
Right. Absolutely.
So with that, we have a little bit of time left. We have a few questions. Folks, feel free to ask any more questions. I want to start right now by thanking Salil, TM, Ravi, and Nelson for participating. It's been great. You guys have been fantastic, and I hope you guys had fun. I had fun. I always enjoy doing these things, and it was a great conversation. So a few questions here that I'm seeing. Yeah, I think we answered this a little bit, but I just wanted to come back to it, so answer it directly. Some thoughts around it, you know, knowing that an API is working properly, given there's many monitoring tools, you know, what about system health performance rather than API correctness? You know, some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to maybe the discussion we were having around instrument early, measure early, build it into the API contract and the design itself, and come up with that strategy and a set of almost frameworks so that you're going to use when you're building these APIs, so you can collect those kinds of metrics. Because to the gentleman's point, a large number of the tooling out there is focused on making sure the thing is running, but it's not focused on making sure that it's doing what you think it should be doing. And again, going back to measuring and discovering the value and making sure it's mapped back to your goals, right? So yeah, there's no magic answer there, at least from what I've seen in terms of a lot of our large customers implementing this. You can't just, you know, it really depends on what the goals of your program are, what metrics you want to measure, what's important, the types of APIs that you have, your monetization strategy, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think that's all absolutely correct. You know, and goals change, processes change, people change in an organization, and what their demand changes. So with that, you want to make sure that to that point that your APIs are delivering on the new goals, right? As those change, then your APIs may need to morph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as they do morph and those goals change, the tools in which you monitor, are they doing what you want them to do, could very likely need to change, right? Based upon what it is you're measuring at that point, right?
Yeah,
So
and that's good.
it has
That's
to
a
be
good
somewhat
point.
fluid, somewhat dynamic, right? Really, it really is organic.
Yeah, this is a never-ending process. You don't put your program in place, develop some APIs, deploy them, and call it done. I always say there's health checks you should be doing. You should be reevaluating. Does the goals of my program still map the goals of the organization? We've got a new. We were acquired. How does that fit in? Things like that, right? So there's a number of different things that can happen. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. That care and taking care of it. That Ferrari runs great, but boy, you don't get that thing tuned on a frequent basis.
Well, you took a step up. You went straight up to Ferrari now.
No, I was pushing one of your buttons. That's why I did it.
We'll leave Formula One out of this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm obviously for obvious reasons of two TIBCO supports and Mercedes fans, so I'll leave it at that. Well, we had one other question, but we're at 2 minutes left, so I want to make sure we wrap up and don't go over time. We will answer that question offline. And again, I want to thank everybody here today and thank all you guys for participating. It's been great. And Maddie, thank you for inviting us to host. I will moderate a panel for you anytime. I really enjoy this, so thank you so much for having us.
You guys did a great job. Thank you so much. And I just want to direct people to the chat. If you want to order Nelson's book, I've gone ahead and linked it right there. And also we have an event survey. If you guys have just 1 or 2 minutes to fill that out, that really helps us tailor these events to better fit your needs because we're here to serve you. So thank you guys so much.
Make sure you add in there about how awesome the moderator was in your
Yeah, Greg James.
Yes,
We got to
indeed.
have him coming back. Thank you all so much. This was fantastic. And thank you guys, all you database, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we can't wait to see you next week. Thank you, Greg. Thank you,
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
everyone.
Robbie.
Robbie.
See you next week.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.